I have something to share. I'm not exactly sure what happened, and I don't have an explanation that fits everything, but maybe some of you might know more about what happened. After thinking about it for a while, I can't shake the feeling that it might have something to do with native folklore or something supernatural, especially given the area that we were in. The Black Hills and Badlands have deep cultural and native history, and what my friend and I experienced there was far from normal. I'll just tell you what happened, and maybe you'll have your own thoughts about what it could have been. We got an Airbnb, and the first night there, my friend was starting to get a little bit sick, possibly a cold, so she went to bed much earlier than me. On the trip to South Dakota, we talked about random weird stuff, as two best friends do on a long road trip. One of these things was how strict we are about closing the lid of the toilet before we flush. We're both big germaphobes, so closing the lid before we flush is a habit we both had for a long time. It's a weird fact, but it's relevant. She's asleep by the time that I finish my dinner and shower, and like any God-fearing American, I use the bathroom before I get in the shower. After I get out, I go check on her because I'm a little worried about how she's feeling. She's absolutely crashed in her room, and I can see her breathing and also hear her snore. After I check on her, I decided to try to go to sleep. The Airbnb is a pretty small trailer. The host is rated as a super host. No strange or negative reviews. My friend's room is on one side of the trailer, then the common area with the entrance that opens directly into the living room, the dining room, and the kitchen. The door to my room is right next to the kitchen drawers and sink. My friend sleeps with her door open, and I sleep with my door closed. I fall asleep quickly, but after a few hours I wake up because I can hear what sounds like drawers rolling on their tracks right outside my door. Now, my friend has been known to sleepwalk, so I think that's what it is. I'm wondering what to do when I realize that I really need to use the bathroom. I'm not mentally ready to go out and see my friend sleepwalking. Honestly, it's always freaked me out a bit, even though I know she can't help it. I open the door, and there's no one there. No drawers are open, nothing looks out of place, and it wasn't a matter of minutes passing since I heard it. It had been seconds. Even if my friend had ran back to her room on the other side, I would have definitely noticed. I'm trying to rationalize everything as I make my way to the bathroom, like maybe some animal was doing some weird stuff under the trailer, and it just so happened to sound like drawers. However, when I get to the toilet, something is off, and it takes me a split second to realize what it is. The toilet lid is not only up, but there is pee in the bowl. So I text her and say, I'm trying to just chalk all this up to you sleepwalking, and I tell her what all has happened. After I finish my business, I go to check on her again, but it seems like she hasn't moved an inch, hasn't even rolled over, not even pulled the covers up. I'm just like, what the fuck? But I'm determined to enjoy my trip, so I go back to my room, lay down, and try to go back to sleep. Any sleep I got was super light, and I wake up a lot, but I don't hear anything else. My friend woke up at 4:30 to officially use the bathroom, saw my text, and just kinda said, maybe. And we left it at that for the day. Neither one of us wanted to talk about it, so when we wake up, we head out early for breakfast for a full day of hiking in the Badlands, and it was honestly amazing. Beautiful scenery, a bunch of great hikes, and we saw a ton of wildlife. The events of the night were put out of my head. Even when we got back to the Airbnb, I was most likely just scaring myself because I'm in a new place far from home. We then eat dinner, take our showers, lay down, and I fall asleep pretty quickly as I'm exhausted from the day. But this night, around 2 or 3, I think, I wake up because there's a steady scratching on the wall outside my room. I know it had been going on for some time because it had worked itself into my dream, and I was having a nightmare about some monster coming after me. The details about the nightmare aren't really clear, but I remember the fear I felt when I woke up to that noise. I know some people would say, it's just scratching, it's not a big deal, but it sparked some kind of primal fear in me. I texted my friend, and I asked her if she could hear it, As soon as I texted her, the noise just stopped. No taper off or anything. It just suddenly stopped. She texted back a few hours later and said she didn't hear anything, but that if I was scared I could come sleep with her. She also offered up the idea of it possibly being a wild animal, being attracted to the smell of the food we had been cooking. I just held on to that idea and let it be. The beds weren't very big, so I decided to stay in my own room, now that I had a semi-logical explanation. The thing is, the trailer was lifted, and the place on the wall that was being scraped up was high up. Again, I pushed any further thoughts out of my mind and tried to go back to sleep. We have one more day of hiking in the Black Hills, then one more night, then we'll head back home. The Black Hills are beautiful, one of my favorite parts of the trip, but this whole time I'm terrified of getting separated from my friend for some reason, even though it's daylight and we're on very popular trails. So that was weird, the feeling that I had. We do our hikes there, then head back to our Airbnb for our final night. At this point, I would like to add that as two young females, we try to be as safe as possible, sharing our locations with a few friends and family members. She has a gun and she is licensed to carry. I have some pepper spray that I keep on me at all times. We move stuff in front of the door to block the entrance, in case a creeper was trying to break in. And of course, we keep the doors and windows locked. We did check the windows as soon as we got there the first night. We checked under the beds every night. Again, it's a small trailer, and not a lot of hiding spots for creepers that we wouldn't think to look. We had agreed to leave about 7 in the morning to head back home. However, about 5 a.m., a few things start to happen. The scratching noise wakes me up again. It had been going on for so long that it worked its way into my dream again. I was dreaming that a big cat was stalking us while we were trapped in the wilderness. When I woke up and grabbed my phone to text my friend, it immediately stopped. I see that my friend had texted me. She was asking, "Did you hear it?" I think she finally heard the scratching, so I text back and say, "Yes, I did." I walk into the living room where she is, and I see that she's so freaked out that she has her gun out. She's been through courses. She knows not to draw your weapon unless there's clear danger and you're ready to shoot. But she was scared, and she doesn't scare so easily. I asked her what's going on, and she said, "I woke up because I heard a low noise. Then I heard shuffling and footsteps in the kitchen. I sat up in bed, and I realized that my door had been shut. That's when I texted you and grabbed the gun." So a couple of things. She slept with her door completely open every night. The heater kicking on never closed it. She wasn't tall enough to kick it shut. Even nudging it with her finger wasn't forceful enough to shut it all the way. It had to be pulled shut. Also, we would have heard someone coming in through one of the windows or the door. Everything was locked tight. We checked every night before bed. Also, the morning before, I had walked around the trailer, looking for signs of damage where the scratching was. There was none. I was also looking for a loose spot where an animal could have gotten under the trailer, to make the noises that we were hearing in the kitchen, but there was nothing. My friend asked me what I wanted to do. The sun wasn't going to be up for a little bit, but at that point I'm pissed. I actually haven't had a good night's sleep in several days. I then say, "Let's get everything and go. Keep your gun out and ready. We don't have a lot, so it's not going to take a long time to get it all in the car." So that's what we do, and we get the fuck out of there. Also, 3 nights there, and we didn't see the moon a single time. I say this because that's what I wanted to do. We even looked it up on Google, and it was supposed to be right around 1/4 to 1/2, so it definitely should have been visible. We could see all the stars, and it wasn't overcast at night. We kept saying on how everything was so weird. That morning as we were leaving, the moon was there, so bright. Like, this might be stupid, but I'm not sure if it just rises up later in South Dakota. But sometimes we would get back to the Airbnb kind of late. It was just weird. We did message the Airbnb host twice about it. She was one of those that was labeled as super responsive and replies within an hour. but she refused to respond to our messages with any kind of explanation. We ended up offering our own, a wild animal of some kind, but she didn't even say anything about that. However, I don't believe it was an animal at this point. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't that. After we put many hours between us and there, and the sun came up, that's when my friend finally said, I wanted to tell you what I already saw that first night in the park, at the Pinnacle's Outlook, and proceeded to tell me about the humanoid figure. She also said that she didn't feel like she had been sleepwalking at all while we were even there. And before I wrap it up, there's a few things I want to say. I checked the Airbnb site several times since then. All great reviews. No mention of anything similar to what we experienced. We did end up leaving a 3-star review. We tried to put what happened to us the best we could. Again, chalking it up to an animal. The host did leave us a great review, while still never responding to our questions. Another thing, I went to another hiking trip with my husband about a month and a half later. I heard scratching on this trip as well, but this time I was able to say, that's a squirrel, or something similar. And it did not bring about that sense of absolute primal fear, and the feeling of being hunted, even while you were laying in bed when you're supposed to be safe. When I was walking around checking the siding for damage after the scratching, I checked the sheet metal that lined the bottom for loose sections, and I didn't find anything. I also looked for somewhere an animal could have fit through, but there was nothing. The history of the land is also pretty strange, and I believe that the land holds on to stuff like that. The Native Americans literally named it Evil Lands. And I was like, well, they wouldn't have done that for no reason. I have seen that some of the younger natives in the area said that their older relatives wouldn't let them go near the area, which I actually didn't know before planning the trip. My friend asked if I would ever go back, and I said most likely not. It was beautiful, but I feel like whatever that thing was let me off with a warning this time. And if I go back, I feel like something will definitely happen. A lot of people were asking how come my friend just decided to keep the sighting of the humanoid figure to herself at first. Well, she did, but she's very logical, and she'll try her best to rationalize things, like myself. I also think she didn't want to scare either of us so bad that it made looking back on this trip more like a scary experience, even though now that's how I see it. But still, I think the less that we talk about it, the less that we acknowledge it, the better it is, because I believe these things feed on fear. We were already scared, but I know talking about it would have escalated the fear much more. If anybody has an explanation for this, let me know. So I was 20 years old and still living with my parents because I was poor, which meant that I had to travel with them and go with them everywhere. We figured it was time to visit some family in the very southern part of the world, called Tennessee. This area was backwoods, pretty wild. These people are very traditional. They do a lot of things we would consider weird, but a family get-together means we all have to hang out. Now, they are decent people once you get to know them. Somehow, I ended up grouped with 3 cousins and a friend from out of town. I'll call them Eddie, Garrett, Austin, and Trent. These are the names of some people I'm related to, but they're not the actual names of the people I'm referring to. Does that make sense? Sorry about this. I'm not really great at making up names. So anywho, we snuck off with 2 6-packs that my grandpa left out. He's a very good man, but he's, how should I say it? He leaves everything, everywhere. So me, Garrett, Austin, and Trent decide that we're gonna go drink somewhere away from the property so nobody will see us. We end up wandering out into the woods. We find a clearing about 30 minutes away. I'm not really sure at this point. Adrenaline kills my sense of time, and we were just talking on the way there. Garrett, the cousin from these parts, seemed really nervous as we kept walking. He's older than us, but he kept complaining about how we shouldn't be doing this, that it's wrong. The rest of us kept telling him to stop being a bitch and have some fun for once. Now I gotta mention, like I said, They do things differently down here. So Garrett was always carrying an old rifle, like from the old days when they hunted for a living. So we lit up a small lamp and sat there in a circle just talking to one another. This whole time Garrett is quiet, and we start getting a little tipsy, not really drunk, just having a few beers. I had half a can and called it good. I still don't really have a taste for alcohol, I guess. Garrett then suddenly said, "We shouldn't be here." I was thinking, well, we just stole beer from our head grandpa. Of course we shouldn't be out here. He then said again, "You don't understand. We really shouldn't be here. We should go." At this point everyone is sort of annoyed with Garrett because he's just saying that we shouldn't be out here. Fine, we'll go in just a few minutes. Let's just finish these last few beers. Not even a minute passes when suddenly it got really cold. "We really shouldn't be here, guys. We have to leave," Garrett said again. At this point Austin laughed, and then Trent mumbled something under his breath. The lamp that we brought flickered as a bug bumped into it, a big ass bug at that. Garrett, now looking super pissed off, got up and walked over to Austin and basically stood him up like a good little soldier. "We're leaving, right now." Austin then stopped laughing and said, "Chill, let's get out of here cause this dude is a party pooper." We all got up and Garrett continued staring where Austin had been sitting at. That's when he said, "We are leaving." Except, he wasn't telling us no more. He wasn't even looking at us. He was staring into the tree line. Trent and I were trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Suddenly, Garrett picked up his gun and aimed it towards Trent. Trent got scared. You could see it all over his face. He said, "Garrett, what the fuck are you doing, man?" "We're leaving right now, ain't we, fellas?" Garrett said. And that's when we noticed that Garrett kept aiming towards the trees. Trent then slowly turned around out of curiosity to see if something was behind him, or figure out what the heck was going on. The trees were dark and you couldn't see anything beyond the clearing. The only source of light out there was that lamp that we had brought. But when Trent turned around, I swear he saw something because of his reaction. His eyes became big. I was too much of a chicken to see what was going on. But that's when Trent suddenly just took off running past Garrett, who kept aiming his gun at whatever was back there. "Don't move until I tell you, but when I say it, run like a fox in a hen house," Garrett said. At this point I was too scared to try and say anything myself, so I just nodded my head. I turned my head to try and sneak a peek to see what Trent saw. "Don't move," Garrett quietly said. He then picked up the lamp by hooking it with the muzzle. "We're leaving right now. We don't want any trouble. We didn't mean anything by it," Garrett kept saying. And that's when I heard something moving in the bushes. Garrett stopped breathing for a moment, and the lamp swung gently. I'm not a fast man, but I know that night I was Usain Bolt. Austin was like 5 feet from me. I could hear him crying. At this point I was crying too. I heard 3 gunshots, one every few seconds, and then a scream. As I'm telling the story, I'm actually crying again. This isn't a joke, but it feels better to write everything down instead of storing it all up. Random, I know, but that's just how I cope with the situation. Anyways, have you ever heard a coyote yelp? They sound like young kids, crying and yelling. I grew up with coyotes in my backyard. This was definitely not one of them. It was high pitch, higher than a coyote, and it was right behind us. Austin and I didn't even look at each other. We just kept running. We finally cleared the trees and entered some meadows near a creek. Garrett appeared behind us, rifle slung over his shoulder, shouting, "Keep running! Don't look back!" The scream was getting louder, but not in volume. It was getting closer. Garrett told us to keep going, and that we were almost across the line. He then stopped and took another shot before moving again. I was thinking, this is how I'm gonna die. Suddenly, there's more screams. We then saw an old fence, not more than 30 yards away. Austin leaped over it like he was in track, perfectly in sync and landing. Adrenaline does make you do some crazy things, so I also jumped over it. However, I landed on my back and saw stars. Garrett leaped over and took aim again, completely out of breath. "We're on our side. Fuck off." That's when the screaming literally just stopped. There were no crickets or anything to fill the void left by it. Just 3 men crying and panicking. Austin was on his knees. I'm pretty sure he had just thrown up. I wasn't even there mentally anymore. Garrett, where's the lamp? Garrett kept his gun up, but his knees were shaking. He whispered, back in the trees. We all looked up and saw the tree line. Sure enough, the lamp was sitting in the trees. Something was standing near the trees, but it was way too tall. It didn't really move. It was just jittering back and forth, like someone had cut out the in-between frames of something that was animated. It moved back and forth across the trees. The light blocked out the details, which was perfectly fine by me. It turned and sort of moved across the ground. Its knees were backwards. Holy shit. Garrett was heaving now. His breath was ragged, but he seemed okay. Garrett, what the hell's going on? He then just said, shut the fuck up. That's when I saw another one appear from the woods and started to jitter. Garrett aimed and shot again. My ears rang for a second. These things, or whatever they were, rushed back and forth across the tree lines, falling in and out of the light. For a second, I thought I saw 3 shapes moving around, but I didn't care. I just wanted all of this to stop. The light in the trees flickered, and Garrett said, when the light goes out, run as fast as you can, and scream as loud as you can for Grandpa. Don't stop, even if I tell you to. Even if anybody tells you anything, don't stop. Austin didn't even argue. I nodded, turning to stare at the trees. The light flickered again, but it came back. The shapes stopped moving. They got closer, bigger, something. I'm not sure at this point. The light flickered again. I expected them to get bigger again, but this time, the light didn't come back on, and that's when we booked it. Austin took the lead, rushing into the forest behind us, screaming for Grandpa. Garrett didn't even hold the rifle for a shot anymore. He was just running like we were. We heard the screams again, but they were getting closer. Suddenly, lights everywhere. The screams stopped. Grandpa was about 50 yards away with my dad, 3 distant uncles, and some other guy in a sweatshirt. They all had guns, and I was thinking, what the fuck is going on here? Garrett and Austin slid into the ground in front of Grandpa. At this point, I didn't care. I crashed into my dad, who hugged me for a second as I kept crying. Garrett was saying a bunch of things, but he was speaking so fast that I couldn't understand him anymore. Grandpa and one of the uncles just nodded. Where's your friend? Trent ran ahead of us and passed us. Didn't he get to you? Grandpa grabbed me and Garrett. Austin was curled up, weeping on the ground. Take him to the house. Hide him in the guest room with no windows. They have seen what he looks like. At this point, I just wanted to go home, or anywhere that counted as home, just away from this. However, Grandpa said that I needed to go with them. Garrett has a good gun, he said, but now, since you want to act all tough and go into places and doing things you ain't supposed to be doing, you will be coming with us as well. And so that's how I ended up going back through the woods again. And I have to admit, I was still scared, but I felt a lot safer with all the guns and the rest of the people. The guy in the sweatshirt whispered something to Grandpa. My dad kept marching, his hand on my shoulder. Garrett then started calling out for Trent. Start calling out to him, he told me. We then kept calling out, and that's when the guy in the sweatshirt whispered something to Grandpa again. We reached the fence, the exact same spot, vomit still on the ground where Austin had been. Grandpa then waved the flashlight around, illuminating the meadows. My uncles were doing the same. Suddenly, a shape darted under the tree line, crying and huffing. It was Trent. He stopped a few feet from the fence and fell to his knees, crying like me. Grandpa and the uncles were totally quiet. Garrett and I didn't move. I thought I lost you guys back there at the campsite. I was scared because nobody was saying anything. Garrett then spoke first. Where did you go, Trent? I got lost ahead of you. I got turned around, I guess. Grandpa leaned in and whispered something to the other guy's ear. He nodded. My dad then tightened his grip on my shoulder. Trent then said confused, "Aren't you guys gonna help?" Grandpa moved in with his gun a bit. "Help? With what?" "Help me get over the fence. The fence is tall, and I'm tired." Grandpa and my uncle slowly lifted their guns, aimed it at Trent. "What do you mean? You look fine." "Funny guys. Seriously, let me in." Grandpa was now more serious. I had never felt so scared of a person before in my life. Trent looked very nervous, and he kept looking back to the tree line. I felt like something was off, but I was too scared and stupid to figure out what it was. "Help me over the fence, guys," Trent said again. The guy in the sweatshirt then spoke up. "Come on over then, kid." Trent then stopped and stared at him in an evil way and said, "Not you. You can't. It's not your land." Grandpa then raised his gun again. My dad tightened his grip on my shoulder. "You're not invited. This is our side. He's a friend of the family. He's not the owner." Trent was still on his knees, but the way he was looking, it felt like he was ready to do something. You know that feeling you get when you have wanted something? Well, this felt the opposite. I felt like we were in a situation we weren't supposed to be in. At that moment, I realized what was so weird about Trent. He wasn't breathing. Trent was now staring daggers at Grandpa. The uncles pointed their guns at him. The other guy just held a flashlight on Trent's face. My dad then whispered something in my ear along the lines of, "Trent, we'll be fine." Grandpa then shot the gun off into the air, just like Garrett had done, and then waited for the shot to stop ringing out. Grandpa and my uncle slowly started to back away. Garrett and my dad guided me back. The guy in the sweatshirt kept the flashlight on Trent and moved in time with Grandpa. One of my uncles stayed behind, nodded to Grandpa, and kept pointing the gun at Trent. We slowly backed away. The guy in the sweatshirt was moving with us. I shouldn't look, but I turned around and looked anyway. The light was still pointed at Trent, but he was moving towards the tree line, like he was a puppet being dragged back. At this point I wanted to scream, but it was caught in my throat. My father grabbed my head and turned it. The scream started again, but they were distant now. Garrett looked over his shoulder, but Grandpa kept walking. We made it to the house. I went inside, and I heard Austin crying from one of the rooms. Dad took me inside, led me to bed, and he basically tucked me in for the first time since I was 10. The terrified kid inside of me didn't care. I spent the rest of the night staring at the wall, before falling asleep to the sound of gunshots and distant screams. The next day, I woke up to find Grandpa sitting at the table with most of my extended family, smoking and reading. Garrett was playing with some of the younger cousins. Austin was watching TV. My dad handed me some eggs and toast, smiling at me like nothing happened. Garrett saw me, smiled and motioned me over. "Trent went home this morning. He's alright." "Nobody's okay." "Who said we're fine? What happened?" Garrett then gave me a look and quietly stated, "As a matter of fact, last night didn't happen. Trent is okay. Drop it." I did find out later that Trent did indeed make it home. He was found by some neighbors down the road. He apparently woke up in the brush and just ran home. He was convinced he got drunk or something and was hung over, which explained all the bruises he had on his back and neck. I only asked my grandpa what happened once. He said he had trouble with people on the nearby land, that they kept trying to get into his property. I then asked why they hadn't taken it. He looked at me, right into my eyes, and said, "I haven't invited them in. That's why." He wouldn't answer anything else after that. He just said, "Not a problem," to everything. It's been about 3 years. I had various visits to my family that ended with something similar going on, but nothing has ever come close to how scared I felt that night. Part of me wants to look up and see what those things were. Another part of me desperately repressing that urge. And my curiosity wants me to go look and investigate what those things were. However, I would say it's the closest thing I ever had to a Skinwalker incident. But to this day, I can't figure out exactly what those things were. I just dropped out of college and I really needed a job. Otherwise my parents were gonna kick me out. I live in the middle of nowhere high up north, so I couldn't just apply to a McDonald's or something. My dad did ask any of his friends if they had work or know someone who does. One dude who lives even further away from any civilization says that he knows a guy who could use some help. The guy owns all sorts of cattle, from cows to domesticated deer, you name it. It's the middle of the summer, so all of his animals are out in the fields around a mountain that he owns land on. It's a pretty normal practice for farmers here. They fence up massive areas and basically just let their livestock roam free. They'll check up on them every day, or hire someone to look after them on the spot. Apparently, this year he underestimated his workload and spread his livestock out far too much. That's where I would come in. I would have to live in this little cabin in the middle of nowhere and check up on the surrounding animals every day. Fix some broken things and clean up the pathways leading through the woods. The cabin was about 3 hours away from the nearest village, 6 hours by foot. Food will be brought to me every week on a Friday, and I was free to do as I pleased when done with my work. The pay wasn't half bad too, and I was only gonna be there for like 3 months. At least that's what I thought. So I met up with the guy. It's a younger guy, like in his 30s. He seemed kind of on edge, but he was pretty chill. I figured that he was just stressed out. He gave me some details about the job, like how the electricity in the cabin worked. It was solar. He mentioned how there was a lot of wildlife, and how I shouldn't get scared when I hear weird noises in the distance. And even then, aside from the occasional wolf being in the area, there wasn't too much to be afraid of. Bears hadn't been sighted in years, and there wasn't any cycled deer. So basically, I would just get paid to relax in a nice cabin in the middle of nowhere, while doing some minimal work. It sounded too good to be true. I took the job regardless, as I didn't really have too much of a choice. I start the next week and get picked up by the guy, who is now my boss. I drive up some sketchy mountain roads through the forest. The scenery is beautiful though, completely untouched nature, birds chirping everywhere, comfortable temperature. Everything feels good. We get to the end of the road, and then we need to hike up 30 more minutes just to get to the cabin. Nothing seems or really feels out of place. It literally just feels like I'm on vacay over the next 3 months. I grab my backpack and follow my boss up the path. Eventually, we get to the cabin. It's about 6,500 feet above sea level. There's a beautiful view of the valley that we just drove through. The cabin is in the middle of a small clearing, and even has a creek next to it for fresh drinking water. My boss then shows me how to use everything from the fire stove to the water heater. I won't bore you with all those details. The cabin is solar powered, so I have to watch the battery. I didn't plan on using that much tech anyway, so I wasn't too worried about it. However, it's important to note that for later. He says that if anything happens, I should give him a call, that it doesn't matter what time it is. And he puts a lot of emphasis on the last part. My phone actually has signal out here. Not much, but enough to make a phone call. He then explains one more time what I have to do, and he hands me a map with all the pathways I should check. This also includes specifically marked areas, where the cows that I'm supposed to look after are often found to graze. Just before he leaves, he tells me that he'll be on the other side of the mountain, looking after some things or something. He wishes me a pleasant stay, and takes off. So I'm finally alone, and I don't have much to do the first day. It's past noon, so I just set up my sleeping stuff, put all of my food in the cupboards, and of course I take care of myself. Nothing much happened for the first few days. I simply repaired holes in fences, cleaned up some stuff like branches and rocks off the hiking paths, and looked around grazing spots to see how the cows were doing. After some time, the third week rolls around. Nothing special had happened up until this point. I was on my routine checkup of one of the hiking paths. That's when I found a dead deer. It was in a pretty uncomfortable part of the woods I could never really put my finger on, and even at that time, the place just kind of felt weird. It was usually covered in shadow since a nearby mountain would block sunlight. Of course, the one dead deer I would find was specifically here. The deer didn't seem to have been killed by anything or anyone. There was no flesh wounds, there was no blood, and there was nothing broken. However, its neck was kind of weird. It wasn't broken, but it looked kind of long. Again, I'm pretty sure that it wasn't broken, but it was just unnaturally long. I didn't take a picture of it. You would always see dead animals out here, especially in the winter, so it wasn't all that special. A couple of days go by without anything special, and then the howling starts at night. Now, for those who don't know, whenever it's mating season, the stags roar to attract females. Look it up on YouTube if you want to know what it sounds like, but it's insanely loud, and from a distance, it can sound scary, as sometimes it'll sound distorted, especially out here if it echoes. But mating season here is in late August to September, and this is early July, so it sounded really loud. Also, sometimes the wind sounds kind of weird, almost like a tad bit vocal. It's hard to explain, really. It was windy a few times, and it didn't really sound anything like it, so I thought nothing of it. I mentioned it to my boss that Friday when he delivers me my food for the week. He says it's normal to hear those things out there. It can be just the wind blowing through the trees or various animals. He does mention the fact that there is a hunting rifle left behind by some hunters for hunting season in one of the cupboards. Kinda weird how he never told me that before, and is only telling me now after I mentioned the noises that I heard. And I noticed that the boss seems on edge again. He looks from right to left a lot, from one end of the clearing to the other. I ask him if he's okay, and he just says that he's just a bit exhausted from carrying all the supplies up the mountain. Some more time passes, and it's week 5. I'm doing my daily routine where I can still hear the howling off in the distance. It still occurs every once in a while. However, it just happens at night. I'm not too bothered by it. After all, there's a lot of wildlife around, any of which could make a sound like that. Or it could just be the echo plus the wind, and then some kind of distortion going on. However, I end up finding more dead animals. It's usually small birds and foxes, but I do find another deer. All of them without any sort of visible wound or blood or anything. But all of them look like they have some body part that was just off looking in some way. Their necks, their legs, their skulls seeming just a bit too long. Again, I can't really put my finger on what was wrong with them, but it feels like something really off about them. It's almost like someone opened up Microsoft Paint, pasted a picture in it, and slightly stretched out a body part, enough to be noticeable, but too little to really stand out if you're not looking for it. So this goes on for some time, until week 8. At this point, I only have a couple of more weeks left to go. My boss still seems on edge every time that he comes by, always asking if the cows are fine. Even the little ones, none of them look hurt or anything. They're all fine. However, literally the next evening, I hear the cows in distress in the distance. I think it's just one trying to regain rank or something in the herd. So I charged at another cow or something. The cows are pretty competitive in their group. They're always trying to gain a rank or lower another cow's rank. They even sometimes fight to the death. It's pretty brutal. I then decided to just continue sleeping for the night and check it out the next day. I do sleep with earbuds in, which, looking back, it's a terrible idea. The next day, I woke up to the bells of cows outside. All the cows are surrounding my cabin, just kinda standing around, not eating, which is very strange. I count them as I always do, and that's when I noticed that one cow is missing. I then call my boss and tell him what happened. He sounds extremely distressed now and just tells me to go look for it. He says that he can't come right now as he can't leave his post or something, so I spent some time looking for the missing cow, but I didn't find it anywhere. I then had to cut it short for a while though, as the weather randomly starts to get bad. The cows stay around the cabin that night, and it actually makes me feel a little bit safe. I still decided to take the hunting rifle out of the cabinet and put a wood cutting axe near the entrance. I'm not really sure what model it is, because I'm not really into guns like that. That night though, I noticed that something is weird. There seems to be some tiny red lights off in the distance. It's stormy and cloudy. The fog shouldn't really allow for light to come through like this, but there's nothing but wilderness in that direction, so I know it's not from a village or a car, but the light just stays there. I do get scared and close all the blinds. The light turns off at some point, leaving me in complete darkness. I check the battery next to my bed. It's empty. It was almost full a couple of hours ago. This thing lasts for a few days when it's only used to keep lights on in short showers. I then get scared even more. I use my phone flashlight to look for candles and matches. That's when those horrible howling noises return. But they sound a bit louder. It literally sounds like there are whispers within the sounds, but you can barely distinguish them. I'll lock the door and listen to my music on my phone all night to keep me distracted. I eventually pass out and wake up the next morning. The storm has cleared. However, the cow is still missing, and now 2 more of them are gone. I'm kinda going crazy at this point. I call my boss and I tell him everything that happened and everything that I heard and saw last night. He then tells me I have to leave immediately and he'll come pick me up at the end of the road, and he does. I'm not sure what happened. The boss didn't talk that much on the way down the road, and he looked very pale. At this point I was too. I didn't even feel like talking. I ran into him at a bar a couple of months later. Apparently, he sold everything, and he's now invested in beer brewing or something. I asked him about the red lights, and he simply nervously chuckled and said it was most likely just some reflections, maybe from satellites or something else in the sky, especially since we're that high above sea level. I then told him about the strange noises that I was hearing, especially the howling and the whispers that seemed to be getting closer every night. He then looked at me dead in the eyes, and after a moment of silence, he just said, "You didn't hear anything." I didn't ask anything else after that. My kids always come into my room at night because they say that they're scared. Last night, my husband was still awake when they came in. They told him that someone was tapping on the bedroom window. My husband went to investigate. He told him it was most likely our dog or something. When he got to the room, that's when he could hear the tapping as well. It was 3 tapping sounds. He looked out the window and didn't see anything, so he went outside with a flashlight and looked as well. Nothing. He went back and closed the bedroom door and could hear the tapping again. Another 3. Also, every single night at 3 a.m., I always wake up. I think I hear my kids walking through the house as I hear the floor. It sounds like footsteps. I check and everyone is always asleep. I wait for my kids or an animal to appear, but nothing. Just the footsteps. Icing on the cake. My cabinets go haywire. It doesn't matter the time of day. My pants will fall inside the cabin, or they will open and close very quickly. I thought my dog or cat got into the cabinets a few times when I was cooking, but whenever I would check, there was nothing. I do have child locks on them, so they never fully open. I'm wondering what I should do to calm everything down, or stop it. I do have cedar above the doors, and I have also smudged a few times. I have heard that when things happen in 3 knocks, 3 scratches on the skin, 3 taps, whatever it is, it seems to be something evil, something that likes to stick around. This story is about my auntie. I can tell this story because I saw what happened. So my auntie had some health problems and she went to doctor after doctor, and they couldn't tell her what was wrong with her. She had a whole bunch of testing done, and all the exams came out good, and the doctor still couldn't figure out what was happening to her. So my grandmother talked to this medicine man about what was happening to her. So he told my grandmother to bring her out to see him before we entered the house. My grandmother said to not touch anything, or to not take anything that hasn't been offered. So we were waiting on the couch for about 15 minutes, I would say. Finally, the medicine man, he told all of us to go into his room. And that's the first time I ever saw a medicine bundle. He said he was getting everything ready, and even asking some things I didn't understand at that time. Then he asked my auntie to see her neck. The man put his hands on her neck like making a cup shape out of his hands. Then he put his hands to her neck. On one of those times he started breathing in and out, and he inhaled very loud. Then he coughed into his hands, and he showed us this dark black green slime. At least that's what I thought it was. Then the man said some things I couldn't understand. Just a few words like bad medicine and to be careful. It was really strange, and it freaked me out a lot. My grandmother never really explained what we saw and what was happening. She just left it at that. I do come from a very spiritual family, so that's why I think all these events that were happening to us were connected by our native spiritual culture in some way. And ever since then, my auntie hasn't had any health issues no more. Thanks for listening. My brother went to a town called Casa Grande to hit up a local bar. After the bar closed at 2 a.m., being drunk, he decided he wanted to come back home to Cells, our reservation. He ended up hitching a ride that was heading towards Cells. Halfway there, the people that he was with made a stop, and they told him that he was going to have to walk the rest of the way because they were turning towards another direction. So he put on his music and started walking. Pitch dark, he crossed a large bridge. On the other side of the bridge was a cemetery. He ended up crossing the cemetery. Shortly after this, he started hearing the sound of footsteps behind him. He said he turned around to see what was behind him, but it was too dark to see anything. He ended up walking backwards, and the sounds of the footsteps stopped. He decided to turn back around and try to run, but when he did, whatever it was right behind him again. That's when he just took off running. As he did, he saw an oncoming car was getting near him. Stupid him jumped in front of the car, but I guess depending on the situation that you're in, who knows what I would have done. Lucky for him, they stopped before hitting him. He told the people in the car what was happening, so they let him in. The only thing is that it was a truck with a full load of hay. He didn't care, so he climbed on top. He did end up making it home safe. And when he has a few drinks, he always tells me this terrifying story about a hoofed creature that scared the shit out of him. Don't ever wander the REZ at night, especially on foot. I heard of skinwalkers before, but I always assumed they were the Native American version of werewolves, so I never gave them much thought. Until last week, when one of my co-workers in my new job told me that they were his most feared folklore creatures. He's originally from Utah, so that makes sense. He suggested some YouTube videos to watch on the subject, and after work that night, I watched about 4 or 5 of the videos. Now, I totally understand his stance on them now. I live in South Carolina, so to be completely honest, I wasn't too worried about the possibility of running into one. My coworker told me that they were basically a Midwestern thing. I would be more worried about Wendigos if I were you. He joked the day after I watched the videos. We had a good chat about skinwalkers and Wendigos during our shift and just revel in the creepiness of them. I mentioned how one of the tales said that the more you talk about skinwalkers, the more they're drawn to you. And he made sarcastic ghost noises to keep the mood light. The night I showed the videos to my fiance, she was way more creeped out than I was. I became kind of obsessed. I love scary things and couldn't help but watch every video I came across. I talked about skinwalkers with my other friends who love horror, looked up skinwalker art, read true skinwalker stories on Reddit, just drove head first into all things about skinwalkers. This went on for a few days until I started feeling a little burned out on the subject. I live in a fairly nice neighborhood where all the houses are on one side of the street. On the other side is land that used to belong to the local elementary school. The building is on the next street over. So basically, it was like the school's backyard or whatever. However, the school shut down about 30 or 40 years ago, and the county just let nature reclaim it. So, directly across from my house is an old chain link fence and just overgrown woods. 2 nights ago, I was smoking a cigarette and I heard some leaves rustling across the street. I didn't bother looking up from my phone. I live across from the woods, so it must have been a deer. The rustling stopped, then it started again, and it sounded like whatever was over there was running back and forth along the fence line, panting like a dog. This, however, caught my attention. There had been a few cases of rabies in my town because of a strange dog that was running around in the middle of the night, and it was definitely something I wanted to keep my eye on. I look up from my phone in the direction of the sounds, and they just stopped. It was like the thing knew I noticed it. I strained my eyes trying to see what it was, but it was obscured by the overgrowth. I didn't look away. Must have stared at the spot for at least a minute. It didn't make another sound, didn't move, so I knew it was still there. A chill ran down my spine, and I began thinking of every Skinwalker video I had watched over the last week, and I felt sick to my stomach. I quickly put out my cigarette and went inside. The next morning, I took my dog out for a short walk. She's a pug zoo named Honey and is like my child. Me and my fiance taught her that pee-pee poo-poo means it's time to go outside to potty. It's the cutest thing. Anyway, this particular morning, I take her out to the front yard to do her business. She pees and then walks around sniffling for about 5 minutes before walking to the side of the street and sitting down. She's never done this before, so I was a little annoyed. I tugged on her leash lightly and tried to bring her back towards the house. "Come on, honey, gotta poo-poo." She didn't budge. This dog could be stubborn sometimes, but this was something else. She tugged back against the leash and just stared across the street, sniffing the air occasionally. It was then at that moment that I realized she was staring at the exact spot that I had heard the thing the night before. I got goosebumps, and I quickly picked her up and began walking back to the house. As I got closer, I noticed something on the ground by my front steps. It was one of the Halloween decorations my fiance had put up on our house. Plastic black roses with plastic eyeballs and spiders on them. The stems were wire, so they can be wrapped around things to keep them secure. This flower was torn apart. Something had come into my porch, taken down the flower, and torn it apart, leaving it in the front of my steps. I picked up the flower and threw it away. I didn't tell my fiance. I didn't want her freaking out. The rest of the day went by uneventfully. That night, I told my coworker about what happened, and he looked a little concerned, but brushed it off. He said what I heard was most likely just a dog, and the flower was most likely knocked down by the wind. I had my doubts. As I was walking to my door after getting home from work last night, I heard some panting as the night before and the clicking of claws against asphalt. I turned quickly to see a dog that looked like a brown mangy bull terrier hauling ass down my street. The street is about 40 feet away from my front porch, so I couldn't get a great look at it, but I could tell it was only running on 3 legs because one looked mangled. It turned quickly and darted into the tree line across the street through a part of the fence that had been pulled back. The fence wasn't like that earlier in the day, and that's when I noticed that the dog didn't have a tail. I almost threw up. Skinwalker legend says that when they take the form of an animal, they never have tails. I tried to rationalize it to myself. Maybe it just had a stub tail that I missed because it was running. However, I immediately went inside. My fiance was sitting on the couch petting Honey. She could see I was upset and asked me what was wrong. I told her nothing, just almost got clipped by a car before I pulled into the driveway. She got up, hugged me, and cursed the person that almost hit me. She then asked me if I could take Honey out for pee-pee poo-poo because she had been creeped out by all the spooky videos we've been watching and didn't feel comfortable going outside at night by herself. Honey perked up. She ran to the door and looked between me and the door all excited. I stared down at her for a moment before agreeing to it. I'll just keep her close to the porch, I thought. We walked off the porch and she quickly tried to walk to the street. I tugged on the leash and she tugged back. She eventually moved to the edge of the porch and peed. After she began walking around sniffing, I told her the usual line. "Come on, honey, gotta poo-poo." She huffed at me, sniffed around some more, and eventually started pooping. I was on the edge the entire time we were outside, but being around her helped me calm down just a little. Then I heard it from across the street. "Come on, honey." My voice, in the exact same tone and inflection as I had just said it, it sounded staticky like an old radio broadcast, but it was definitely my voice. Honey then stopped what she was doing and stood alert. She looked over to me and cocked her head. "Come on, honey, gotta poo-poo." Again, my voice called from across the street. Honey began whining, looking from me to the woods across the street. I picked her up and I began backing up to the steps, not taking my eyes off the part of the fence that had been pulled back. "Honey, come." The voice sounded firm now, like it was getting aggravated. Honey squirmed in my arms, whining. I didn't know if she was trying to get out to go to the voice or to run inside, but I wasn't taking any chances. I turned and bolted up the steps and to the door. As I walked inside, I turned one last time to look across the street. There, standing in the part of the fence that was pulled back, was the dog. Its eyes were glowing a dull orange, and it had its teeth bared. The face was all wrong, like someone had taken a distortion tool and just dragged around random features. Once again, I didn't tell my fiance. Stupid horror movie cliche shit, I know, but I really didn't want her losing her shit. I just told her there's a strange dog running around the neighborhood, so to not take Honey out at night. Later that night, after we had gone to bed, I woke up to the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth outside my window. Against my better judgment, I rolled over to try and see it, and then the pacing stops. "Come on, honey." My voice called out, cutting through the quiet of the night. I prayed my fiance didn't hear it. It called out 2 more times before I heard it walking away. I didn't sleep a wink the rest of the night. Today, when I get to work, I'm going to ask my coworker what I can do to get rid of this thing. I'm scared. I don't think there's a way. But if anyone knows anything, please let me know. My father told me a story once. I'll never forget it, for a few reasons, that is. I think it's the first story he ever told me as a child. It's also the story of how my grandfather died. But to be honest, that isn't the reason. You hear stories on TV, or sometimes you overhear something in a public place. People talk about a ghost, aliens, and you think to yourself, this isn't real. They're making it up, or they're mistaken, or they're crazy, or something along those lines. You just can't believe it until something happens. Something that brings it all together, connects the dots in a way you didn't think of before. Maybe it happens to you. Maybe you hear the same story again and again, happening to different people. It doesn't take long for the world to become a lot bigger than you thought it was. As I said, this is a story my father told me, but I never believed it, even though he swore up and down it was real. It wasn't until I started clicking around the internet that I started to believe. I started to hear other stories just like the one my father told me. It didn't take me long to believe in the rake. That's not what my father called it, of course. He's never used the internet in his life. He wouldn't know what the consensus has taken to naming it. When he chose to call it something other than it or that thing, he called it Skinwalker, after an old Navajo tale his grandfather told him. But I'm gonna tell you the story exactly the same way he told it to me. We were out hunting one night, he would tell me. Coyotes. We would kill them for $50 a skin. They lived on a dairy farm in Ohio. We would do it every night because we needed the money. Sometimes, while we were out, we would come on a deer and kill it. The landlord didn't mind it, and it could feed our family for a few nights and save us some money. Anyway, we were done making our rounds and heading home, walking, cause we didn't have a car or some four-wheeler back then. We would cut through the woods. That's when we came up on it. Blood everywhere, splatter on the trees, in the grass, in the creek, everywhere. At first we figured it was a pack of coyotes. We had seen it sometimes. They can scavenge and start hunting deer or cattle. The worst was when they bred with feral dogs. But this was nothing like that. See, when a pack of dogs or wolves or coyotes attack something, they'll do it the right way. They'll pick one that's weak, or sick, or old, or just small. They'll hunt it, draw it into a corner, some place it can get out of, and they'll run it right to the biggest one, the alpha. And that deer will never see that alpha. It might hear it, but it won't see it. It'll just notice that its own throat is gone, and then it'll drop dead. It's quick and it's clean. But that wasn't what happened here. Something had run up on a den of deer. Coyotes won't attack a den, nor would a pack of wolves, because they'll get too much of a fight. There were three bodies, just torn apart. A leg here, a torso there. A predator doesn't do that. They don't leave behind scraps. Whatever had done this hadn't done it for food. It had done it for fun. But we didn't know that. We saw a bunch of corpses, torn bodies, and we think it's something we gotta take care of. I remember my dad telling me to go home. He thought it was a pack of feral dogs, but I wasn't gonna leave him, and I damn sure wasn't walking through 2 miles of woods alone, with nothing but a .22 and a pocket knife. He was only 13 at the time, so a .22 rifle was about the only gun he could use. Dad had a shotgun, and I wasn't going anywhere without it. It took me a while to convince him, but finally we began tracking whatever did that. It wasn't difficult either, we just followed the blood. It seemed like that thing bled a deer before it got away, or it dragged one for a mile. I don't know. I know that I never seen my dad scared before that night. We started hearing noises, and I've been in a lot of woods my whole life. I've been all over the world, and I ain't never heard noises like I heard that night. I heard things screaming, deer, fox, rabbits, raccoons, birds, just scared. Keep in mind, this is maybe 12 or 1 o'clock, except the fox and some birds. Nothing was supposed to even be awake, but they weren't just awake, they were moving. I saw a flock of birds that night fly straight into trees just trying to get out of there. We came up on a pack of coyotes, nearly shot a couple thinking it was what we were looking for, but then we saw they were running towards us, and they ran right past us. Didn't even notice. Then some of the deer did the same. Then some rabbits, squirrels, foxes, even a couple of wild hogs. These things were supposed to be eating each other, and the only thing they cared about was getting out of there. We should have put it together that maybe whatever we were tracking, it wasn't something we were supposed to see, and maybe it wasn't something we could kill. I don't even know why we didn't just go home. I guess we were curious. I think that was my dad's nature, to go towards trouble, to fight, and knowing what I knew about what my father did during the war, my nature was to stay close to him. We finally get into an open valley. It was normally a soy field, but it wasn't in season, so it was just flat dirt. We saw the tracks then. A lot of the animals fleeing the forest had paved over the land, but where that deer blood was, nothing had taken a single step. It's almost like they were leaving it for us to find. The tracks were shallow. Whatever it was couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, but that didn't mean much. A bobcat weighing 40 pounds wet nearly tore out my damn throat once. All that means is that it's quick and hard to hit. So we follow the tracks, and it doesn't take us long to find out where it is. There's this old schoolhouse that sits on top of a hill. Half of it had been ripped out by a tornado, but nobody lived there. Not for a long time. We caught homeless people in there, sometimes, or druggies looking for a safe place to shoot up. We figured maybe that was it. Maybe it was some sick kid riding a high. But we didn't think that for long. We get within 50 yards, and we hear this noise. A screeching kind of sound. It was sort of made up of two different sounds. One was a high-pitched screech. Another was a low-pitched growl. It was making both at the same time. We get within 20 yards and we hear the sound. I can remember thinking that it sounded like paper being torn apart, while someone was swinging water in a bucket back and forth. Dad looks at me, kneels down, and whispers, "I gotta stay behind him, 'cause we're about to corner him. Any animal will fight when it's cornered, especially when it's a predator. But we can tell by the tracks that it's just one." He tells me it's most likely a single feral dog, most likely rabid. The plan is to sneak up on it while it's eating, shoot it, and then keep shooting it till it don't move anymore. Then we slit its throat. If it gets to Dad, it's my job to shoot it or stab it to get it off of him. So he walks up, and I'm right behind him, just a tad to his side so I can see what it is. I wish to this day I hadn't. It was leaning over a carcass, tears off its flesh, and throws what it doesn't nibble aside. There's blood all over the brick, glistening in the moonlight. It's pale white, human looking, but not quite human. It had arms and legs like a human, but it sat like a monkey. It was hunched over. Its hands weren't normal. It had long fingers with claws at the end. So we see that and my dad hesitates. He wasn't about to fire on a person, so he clears his throat to try to get it to turn around. I swear to God, all the noise just ceased. I ain't never heard true silence before that. Nothing, and I mean nothing, made any noise, which made it all the louder when it turned around, made this shrill cry, and jumped on Dad. He got a shot off. I think he missed. If he hit the thing, it didn't mind, but it was on him. I started shooting it with the 22 point blank, but it barely bled the thing. I got off 5 rounds, and then I started hitting it with the gun butt, but it wasn't budging. It didn't even acknowledge that I was there. It clawed at my dad, taking off bits of his flesh. It started on his torso, ripping off the skin. Then it moved up. It tore off his throat. It tore off his nose, his eyes. It scalped him. Then it started digging in and ripped off the bottom half of his jaw, the little bones in that tube in your neck, then his ribs. I don't exactly remember what happened, but somehow my dad's knife ends up in this thing's shoulder, and my dad ends up on my back. I'm running, and by God, I'm running faster than I ever run before or after, and it's following me. I end up back in the woods, opposite the ones we've been in. I'm heading towards the landlord's house, 'cause it's half a mile away. I can hear this thing screeching and moaning. I hear the tree branches crack and get thrown around. It sounds like someone's taking an axe to every single tree I pass. It's cracking so loud and often, but I just ain't looking back. Finally, I trip into gravel. I look up, and there's my landlord and a bunch of his buddies drinking around a campfire. I scream and I cry, and they come over. I'm telling them to call an ambulance, and he looks at me, and I'll never forget what he said. "What is that on your back?" he asked me. Just as he said it, he saw one of those god-awful flannel shirts my dad wore everywhere. It was what was left of my dad. Most of his head, his torso, but nothing after the waist. Suddenly, we hear it, screeching. He grabs me. My dad gets thrown on the ground. I'm fighting him, crying, 'cause I think we can still save him, somehow. But my dad had been gone before I ever picked him up. He has to pick me up and throw me inside before I come with him. He and his buddies were all inside and they're locking doors and getting guns. The landlord's asking me, what happened? But I just don't know what to tell him. He pieced enough of it all together to understand that there was something dangerous out there. All the lights in the house are on, and someone calls the cops. They'll be there, but in 15 minutes. We look outside and see it walk in front of the fire they made. Don't know what it is. One of them says it looks like an ape. Suddenly, something goes through the window. We shoot at it, but it ain't the thing. It's a dog. My landlord's dog. Just the body though, not his head or legs. We start pushing things in front of doors and windows when we hear something in the garage. I remember one of his friends saying that the doors were open. We hear metal and glass just get ripped apart. We put a couch and a TV in front of the door to the garage. It banged around some more, but then it got quiet. Not silent like it was before. We could hear it move around some, and the guys were talking, making sure the guns were ready. Someone hands me a pistol. No sooner did I cock the hammer back did we hear something shatter upstairs. Then we heard it screech again, except now it was louder, and it didn't echo and fade out. because now it was inside the house. We all rushed to the one door leading upstairs, and we got to it just as that thing did. It opened it just a bit, and 4 or 5 men just slammed into it. It got its hand through. Someone with a shotgun took care of that, put the barrel right up to its wrist and pulled the trigger. Cut its hand off, clean. That only pissed it off though. It started pushing on the door, clawing. We were on one side pushing as best as we could, and it was on the other side doing the same. That wood wasn't just going to hold it, so someone tells us to keep our heads down. Suddenly, the top half of the door is just gone. My ears are ringing, and there are splinters everywhere. 2 or 3 of them just unloaded on the top of that door. I don't really know where it went after that. The police got there. I was still glued to that door, what was left of it. The sun was up before they got me off of it. They put me in a hospital for a while. A lot of people talked to me, but I didn't talk back. Not for a long time. When I got back home, I got a job from the landlord, working on the farm. We didn't talk much, not about that thing, but I signed up for the army when I was 19, and he sat me down to drink some scotch as a send-off. I then asked, right away, what the police told him. The story that they told was that it was a wild animal, most likely a wolf, or maybe a bear that had migrated north. I then asked them how they could say that when they had the hand. He looks at me, stunned. He tells me that the hand never made it back to the station. The cop who had it in his car wrecked, drove into a tree, and died on impact. The hand was never found, most likely taken away by an animal. The cops, when they would acknowledge the hand existed at all, said it was simply the paw of a bear that looked like a human hand. I never talked to the landlord again. He went missing when I was in basic. The cops never found him. They said he owed some people some money and just ran away, but I don't think it's that simple. I never went back to those woods. I wouldn't even if I had the whole goddamn US Army in my back. But that was a lie. When my mother died, I don't think my father felt he had anything left, and that he might as well settle old scores. He went to those woods, and he never came back. The FBI was called. They did a show for everyone involved, but I knew they weren't actually looking. I had to get one of the agents drunk and slip him a few 50s before he finally told me that they get a few calls about those woods every year, about someone up and vanishing, but that was all he wanted to tell me. Before he got up and left with the rest of his team, he got a napkin and he wrote, "The Rake." I didn't know what he was talking about until I looked it up on the internet. But to be honest, I wish I would have rather not known. This incident took place when I was 17. I was with my family. We were going through the mountains near Window Rock, Arizona. It was late at night, and all around us as we drove was darkness and tall trees. We were in a pickup truck. I was sitting in the front with my sister and her husband, who was driving. My 2 brothers and cousin were sitting back in the bed. All of a sudden, this thing or creature runs out in front of us and across the headlights. At the moment I thought it was a deer. My brother-in-law, Eddie, said it was a coyote. It happened so fast, but just in case, we do say a prayer. After a few minutes we soon forgot about it, driving along and talking. When up in front of us, there, just standing in the middle of the county road, are 4 more coyotes. Now, I've seen a lot of coyotes out where we live, but rarely do we see them more than 2 at a time, and even less sitting in the road. Eddie slows the truck, but they stay right there almost as if they're daring him. Then, when it looks like he's going to have to stop or hit them, they walk away towards the shoulder and disappeared into the trees. Eddie then makes a remark that something spooky is going on, and he wants to get home as soon as possible. But my sister tells him better safe than sorry, and not to go too fast. Now, the only thing worse to us Navajos than coyotes appearing out of nowhere is the hoot of the owl. Well, most of the time it's no big deal. Just odd-looking birds hunting for mice. When you hear them the way we did, something's not right. It could mean that someone close to you is in danger. The fact is, if they are hunting, they are most likely quiet. Anyways, we start hearing these owl hoots, one after the other, as if they are calling ahead, alerting some dark entity that we are on our way. More curious than that, there were 6 of us in that truck, and I know I counted 6 hoots. The turnoff from the county road is a dirt road, and it is less than 10 minutes from our house. Eddie is driving along, going a little faster than my sister is comfortable with. Looking back over my shoulder, I can see the rest of them there in the bed, bouncing and sliding around a little bit. Only a minute or 2 down the road, we can see the lights from the houses, still in the distance, but close enough where we're all feeling better about things. But before we get there, Eddie slams on the brakes and yanks the truck to the left. I see something big and black and definitely upright right in front of us. Despite Eddie's efforts, the truck runs right into it. We hit it so hard that it sounded like a gun going off. I was holding on tight to the door and seat, but I could hear the rest of my family being thrown around in the back. They were screaming and cursing. Eddie then managed to get control of the vehicle pretty fast. When it stopped, I jumped out to make sure my 2 brothers and my cousin were okay. They were only banged up a little bit, which is more than I can say for the pickup. The whole nose was totaled. The only thing still intact was one headlight, which was still lit up. As we're standing around the truck, we're all looking to the right of the road, where less than 6 feet away is this 6-foot-high chain link fence that runs along the shoulder in both directions as far as the eye can see. The woods beyond the fence go all the way back into the hills. The point is that there is no way that whatever we hit took off in that direction, or even came at us from that way. Basically, it came out of nowhere, as if it loomed up from the surface of the road itself, or dropped down out of the sky. Meanwhile, Eddie was taking a closer look at the damage. It was, after all, his truck. He noticed that there was some skin, hair, and blood on what remained of the grill, along the lip of the hood, and even by the light fixture that was broken. Convinced that whatever it was hurt and possibly crumpled up nearby. We looked around up and down the road and off to the shoulder to the left, but we found nothing. As it was really dark and things were kind of eerie, we decided we would come back when the sun was up and look around. We all piled back in the truck, but Eddie couldn't get it to start. He would turn the key in the ignition and not even get a sound, as if there was no battery. The funny thing though is that one headlight was still on. Go figure. No sooner had Eddie finished cursing and punching the steering wheel when we hear off in the darkness and in the trees to the left some whistling and laughing, as if someone is playing games with us. 1 second it seems to be coming from over here, the next second from over there, and then after that from back a ways. It went on like this for like 10 minutes. My sister tells us that it's a skinwalker. And then she starts whispering Navajo prayers. By this time, only my sister is still in the truck. Eddie and I are standing by the bed on the driver's side, and my other two brothers and cousin are in bed. My older brother, Nicky, is unafraid. He thinks that it's just some idiot in the woods, and volunteers to run to the house and come back with my father's car. The house is less than a mile away. No sooner does he start jogging off, we hear the same laughing and whistling go with him, as if he is being followed. He told us later that he was aware of it, and even though he thought he heard his name being whispered, he just kept jogging along all the same. About 10 minutes later, we see these headlights coming towards us. It was Nicky. When we all got back to the house, Eddie called the sheriff to report the accident. It was super late, but he told Eddie he would meet him there and have a look just in case somebody did get hit. I went back with Eddie in my dad's car. The sheriff showed up a few minutes later. He had one of those industrial flashlights, but as much as he looked around, he couldn't find anything either. He agreed by the look of the hair left behind that whatever we hit, it wasn't a deer. When we told him about the whistling and laughing, his whole demeanor sort of changed. It was obvious that he was no longer interested in standing out there in the dark. He went back to his car and wrote out one of those little accident reports and gave it to Eddie. The next day, my mother had a friend of hers come to the Hogan. She was this really old woman that we were afraid of when we were kids. She had this small crystal, sort of pale yellow in color, that she held up and looked through, as if she could see into the past. She told my mother there was a fierce battle of wills between a local medicine man and a skinwalker last night, and that if it wasn't for the medicine man distracting the skinwalker, all 6 of us would have died when the truck went out of control and hit the trees. She never did tell us who that medicine man was, or the skinwalker, though she did tell us that she knew them both. And interesting enough, when Eddie went back for the truck the next morning, it started right up without a problem. So if you're ever traveling through a Navajo REZ or Navajo Nation or around here at night, pray to whatever gods you have that your car does not stop and that you don't run into any dog, coyote, deer, or any animal. This encounter takes place in Chinle, Arizona, at our house. The 5 of us, a school friend, 2 cousins, my sister and I, were all in high school at the time. We were hanging out and everyone decided to spend the night because it was the middle of the summer and it was so hot. We set up our folks' van and my older brother's pickup truck so we could sleep outside where there was at least a bit of a breeze. We spent most of the earlier part of the night doing what teenagers do, including a little smoke, if you know what I mean, and also a couple of beers. Sometime after midnight, the 3 girls decided to call it a night and climbed into the bed of the pickup truck. My friend and I stayed out on the porch for another hour or so before heading to the van. We must have dozed off soon afterwards. According to my sister, she's a year younger than me. She is still awake, just lying there and looking up at the stars. The sky out here is really clear at night. There are stars everywhere. When out of nowhere, the neighbor's dogs from across the dry bed start to bark, which around here means that the local wildlife is out and about. My sister says she is listening between the sounds of the dogs to see if she can hear what's out there. Black against black, she suddenly sees this figure crouched on the roof of the pickup and staring down at her. She becomes absolutely frozen. partially out of fear and partially through no will of her own. She wants to scream or at least say something, but she can't find her voice. It's as if she's gasping for air, but without making any noise, and as if her lungs just won't fill. Just then, our younger cousin wakes up. She says because out of nowhere she gets this feeling of intense dread. She sits up kind of suddenly, and at the same time, it is like my sister is released from a spell. The air rushes into her lungs, and she lets out a scream, pointing to the top of the truck. But whatever it was is now gone. All three girls are now wide awake and panicking. They jump out of the back of the pickup and make for the house where my parents are sound asleep. My friend and I, totally oblivious to the excitement and somewhat under the influence, remain blissfully unconscious. Inside the house, my sister tells the other girls what she saw, or at least thinks she saw. At first they're all scared, but then they just start laughing. Then they become brave. My sister grabs a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and the three of them venture out into the dark yard. They come off the porch and paint the front of the property with the beam of the flashlight. They see nothing of interest. Now they head towards the back of the house, all together as if the light is some kind of shield. As the beam moves across the open yard, and then to the hill of the back of the property, they see this figure, moving quickly and steady, but in an awkward way, as if it has a new pair of shoes, making its way to the top. Before they can get a good look, it disappears over and down to the other side. My sister wants to go after it, but my two cousins pull her back towards the house. They go inside and wake up my parents. My mother refuses to leave the house, but my father, thinking that he's got some sort of thief running around his property, grabs his shotgun, 20 gauge, and makes for the hill. Of course, whoever or whatever it is no longer to be seen. He fires off 2 shots into the darkness anyway. Not that she needs to after those 2 shotgun blasts, but my sister then comes over to the van to wake us up to go inside the house. The only thing I'm asking is why the old man is blasting away into the night. She tells me her story. My friend, who definitely partied harder than I did, doesn't stir an inch. I told my sister I'm staying where I am, so the 3 girls decide they too are staying outside and set up watch. All 3 girls promise they won't fall asleep. Nevertheless, the 2 cousins are soon nodded out, and my sister is again alone with the stars. She says it's no more than 20 minutes, if even that many, when she hears what sounds like someone talking to themselves in Navajo. But it's old Navajo, and she doesn't know what's being said. The sound is coming from back by the hill. My sister wakes up the other 2 girls, and they run back up to the house. My sister makes her way back to my parents' room. My dad is out like a light and not responding. My mother, however, is talking in her sleep, as if she's admonishing someone. At the same time, she is invoking the name of Jesus. We are Christian after all. The next morning, my sister is asking her if she remembers any of it. My mother recalls having a dream in which something dark and menacing is outside the door trying to find its way in. She has no doubt it was evil, but she says that the prayer she did made it go away. Anyways, at the same time my mother is talking in her sleep, my sister feels a presence to the back door of the house of something she describes as evil. All 3 girls swear there's a heavy smell of something dead, which makes them nauseous. No sooner does my mother name Jesus, the feeling and the smell go away. When morning comes and the sun is up high and bright, the 3 girls and my mother go outside and have a look around. There, up on the hill is a spot in the high grass that's all flat, as if something was sitting there. But there are no trails, tracks, or footprints of any kind. As they all come back to the house, my sister leaves the group and goes to the pickup where she left her sandals. She finds upon one of them a clump of long black hair, frizzy and tangled. All of the girls, including my mother, have dark hair, but none of them like that clump. She shows it to my mother, who tells her to immediately throw it into the fire of the stove. She tells her it is the mark of a skinwalker who intends to do bad medicine and must be destroyed. I recently moved to a house in Russia. I spent a few days in there, and I did not feel anything was wrong. One day, I decided to explore the snow-covered terrain, as staying in the cabin had become boring. I then noticed there were scratch marks on my door. They seemed very strong and prominent, yet I thought of it as some effect of the weather. There wasn't anything interesting, only the intriguing environment of the place itself. I soon discovered a pile of bones, scattered across the snow. I shook it off as a kill or a hunt of some sort. I kicked at the snow in hopes of finding a decent object that would be the highlight of my day. Along with the last pile of snow I launched, what seemed to be an old phone suddenly appeared and landed right onto the pile of snow. It seemed to be a very early phone. It was also heavily stained with red paint. I felt it would be wrong to switch on the phone, but I was too curious, and it was tough to resist the temptation. After I returned, I charged the phone, and sure enough, it opened up. It seemed to have been recently bought before it was lost or disposed of. All the applications were there, like the ones that you can't delete, but nothing else. I viewed the photo album and I saw a video, one that dated back to December 7th of 2011, but it was all black. The first 2 minutes were continuous crunching, so I assumed the person wasn't intentionally filming that. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like murmuring. I kept repeating that part and made out that the person was whispering some words, and then it was silence. I assumed the video was over. Upon leaving the video, I discovered it wasn't over. There were still at least 3 minutes remaining. It was silent for a minute before I heard a loud roar, and then there was a really loud strike. I could have sworn I heard a bone crack. It was followed by a loud crash. There was silence for a moment before I heard one of the most terrifying ends anyone could meet. I continued to listen as the roars began to fill my ears. Then, out of the blue, a series of blood-curdling screams drowned out the previous sounds. It continued on, and the screams became more desperate, getting loud. I could literally hear sounds of bones crunching. The screams were so loud at this point, and 2 audible cracks were the last thing I heard before the video went silent. I then knew that the scattered bones weren't from an animal in a kill, and that the phone wasn't disposed of, nor was the red paint on the phone actually paint. And most terrifying of all is that whatever the hell caused this, it knows I am here. A woman living in White River, Arizona, comes home late at night from running an errand. She pulls up her driveway, gets out of the vehicle and using her keychain, opens the garage door. Just as it's going up, she hears something run up at her back. As she turns, she sees this dark shadowy figure slip in behind her husband's truck, which is in the driveway, and to her left. The only thing that she sees is that it has patches of short, scraggly hair. And the feet that she saw don't look like they belong to anything that's human. She runs into the garage and into the house, screaming for her husband. He comes out the house and checks all around, but he finds nothing. He does tease her a bit and tells her that she shouldn't let her imagination get the better of her. However, only minutes later, a friend who the husband is expecting arrives. He's all excited and somewhat upset. He explains that as he was coming towards the house, some two-legged creature, he says it looked like a skinny bear, only really scraggly and skinny, with its mouth and teeth exposed, almost like it was drunk. It came stumbling out of the trees and straight into the side of his SUV. He slammed on his brakes, but when he got out to look, there was nothing on the road or off to the shoulder. The two then go out to have a look at the SUV, and sure enough, there's a small dent and some black hair stuck to the rear fender on the driver's side, and some hair in the bumper, but there's no blood. Before I begin, I'm 16 years old and I'm a male. About 3 years ago, I was in Virginia visiting family over summer. We were right outside the DC area and staying in a 2-story house near the freeway. On the other side of the freeway was a forest. So my mom, her boyfriend Eric, and I were all staying with Eric's parents. We had brought some night vision binoculars and decided that tonight was the perfect time to use them. So after dinner, we gear up and head out. We pass under the freeway and head into the woods. When we get about 5 minutes into the forest, we set down our bag and take out our binoculars. My mom looks around with them for a while, seeing a few squirrels here and there. She gets tired of them and passes them to me. I look around for a while, being careful not to look at the freeway for fear of being blinded. I spot something behind a tree about 50 feet to our left. I concentrate on it, trying to figure out what it is. It looks like a pale, bald, anorexic man looking straight at us from behind the tree. I get a bit uneasy, but I'm hesitant to believe it's actually there. I ask Eric to take a look, just in case. To my despair, he sees it too. He describes it much the same way I did. Now Eric, a former amateur boxer, and I train MMA almost every day, but neither of us wants to stick around with that thing. We start heading back to the house, crossing under the freeway. We take another look behind us as a car comes by. All three of us see glowing eyes lit up by headlights on the other side of the freeway. We say, "Fuck that," and head back to the house. When we get back, Eric's parents are asleep, and my mom and Eric go upstairs to the guest room. There's only one guest room, so I have the couch downstairs. I'm a little too excited after seeing the thing in the woods, so I end up staying up all night. Around 3 a.m., I'm watching TV and start hearing footsteps above me. I quickly remember our earlier encounter and panic a little. I try to calm down and tell myself it's just one of the dogs, or maybe someone who couldn't sleep. I keep hearing the footsteps for a while, until I hear a doorknob jiggle. I find it weird that they're trying to open a locked door, but try to ignore it. They stop, walk around for a few more minutes, and then it's quiet again. I stay up until the sun starts coming up, and then pass out. My mom wakes me up, and I remember the footsteps from the night before. I describe what happened, and ask if one of them got up at any time. She says no, and I think it must have been one of the dogs. That is, until she tells me the room above me is the office. No one was in the office, and the door stays locked at night. My heart sinks as I piece it all together. I don't know if it was that thing for sure, but I think it was. I'd done a lot of research, trying to figure out what that thing was that night. I found two creatures that seemed to match it. I think it was either a skinwalker or a wendigo. Whichever one it was, I'm just thankful that door was locked. I know I wouldn't be able to fight that thing, no matter how tough I am. To start the story off, and to give a little insight about me, I'm an 18-year-old female who grew up in Michigan and have lived in the country for as long as I can remember. And just a heads up, this is a long story, so bear with me. Now, back to the story. On one hot summer weekend, me and a couple of friends, including my boyfriend, let's call him Tony, and my older brother, let's call him Brad, decided we were gonna go camping for the weekend since it was such a nice warm week. Tony's parents had owned a cabin surrounded by a huge wooded area with a personal lake and no neighbors for at least 4 miles. But being stupid teenagers, we didn't really think about that. All we were ready for was to party like any normal teen would. Well, after being there for 2 hours, our fun had started. Tony's friends had brought tons of alcohol and weed to last us the whole weekend, so we wouldn't be bored since we had no service and only movies to watch. After it got around 12 a.m. and was pitch black, we had a huge bonfire going. It was a total of 6 people, including me and Tony. As we talked and laughed about upcoming events in our lives, we were so distracted that we didn't notice that my brother had literally frozen his eyes onto one section of the woods. Mind you, we were all intoxicated and high at the time. Eventually, our talking ceased when Tony realized his friend and my brother had an emotionless expression. "Hey dude, you alright?" he asked Brad. Silence. Brad didn't reply or even make any movements that would indicate he heard him. After that, I started to get scared, as well as the other 2 girls there. It took a lot for my brother to act that way. Eventually, I was the first to catch on that he was excessively staring into a certain spot in the woods. I turned my head and followed his gaze the best I could. And when I finally caught on to what he was staring at, my heart dropped. There was, right fucking there, was, at first look, a dog. At least, that's what I thought. It was some person's dog that wandered off. But then, my brain kicked in, and I realized there wasn't neighbors for miles. So, how could there be a dog? My mind started to race while Tony still tried to get Brad to speak or even move. Then, in one motion, this thing stood up tall. And when I say tall, I mean fucking gigantic. It had to be at least 6 feet tall. Everyone now saw it. How could you not? The other 2 girls and the other boy with us were shocked as they finally grasped why my brother was as still as a stick,
No one moved for what seemed like hours. Tony was the first to talk. "No tell," he mumbled. No one heard what he said but Brad, and I swear to you, when I say his eyes widened as big as pan saucers, that freaked me out immediately. "What did you say?" one of the girls asked. "It has a fucking tail," he hissed at her. My heartbeat stopped. He was right. There was no tail on this thing. My clouded alcohol mind cleared up in a fraction of a second when I finally realized what this thing was. Now I understood why my brother was basically shitting his pants. This thing was a skinwalker. My instincts kicked in right then and there, but before I could nope the fuck out of there, the thing let out a terrible stench, like rotting meat, before screaming, inhuman-like. The sound was enough to scare the fuck out of everyone. My brother was the first up out of his chair and started shouting native words to the creature, while I told everyone to get the fuck inside. No one questioned me when they saw just how dead serious I was, especially Tony. He's never seen me so scared, so he knew it was a bad situation. We all hightailed into the cabin, with my brother behind us, still shouting native words at the creature, which seemed to keep it at bay, while it gave us enough time to get inside. He slammed and locked the door before turning all the lights off and grabbing a special ash from the kitchen counters and started throwing it at every window and door while chanting. Of course, he had everyone freaked out and basically in tears at that moment. After he was done, no one said a word for a long time, all of us still in shock. He grabbed our dad's pistol and had it posted by him for hours. Everyone was entirely shaken up to even question what happened. We must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke up to my brother packing all our stuff into the 2 cars early in the morning. I understood why. We had native family. We knew what we were dealing with, and we knew it would come back, and maybe not alone. Before we left, I did a blessing on the cabin and spoke a few calming words to the still very freaked out girls. We left as soon as everything was packed up. To this day, we still haven't explained exactly to our friends what happened that night. But they have also never bothered to ask us.
Hey everyone, I'm a huge fan of all scary things, and even the unexplained. I even have my own YouTube channel, where I post interviews that I have done with people who have experienced any sort of paranormal activity. However, there is one thing that I've always been, well, quite a skeptic about, and that is skinwalkers. I mean, witches who transform into animals, and apparently are only confined to a specific area within America. To me, it always sounded like the typical legends and stories about the boogeyman, that parents tell you about. However, there are some events that have been happening that have actually made me doubt everything. And now I'm sharing this story so that you all can avoid what I did, and also see if anyone out there can actually help me. My friend Zanny is of Navajo descent. He always shared cultural insights and stories of the REZ with me. It was during one of our discussions over text that he first introduced me to the legends of the skinwalkers. He said something about shape-shifting humans, and with curiosity, I gladly accepted his invite to visit the REZ. Being a YouTuber or media creator, I plan to stay for a week, hoping to go deeper into these stories, do some research, capture photos of notable sites, and gather first-hand accounts from the locals. The REZ was unlike any place I've been to, with its landscapes perfect for photos It was both beautiful and eerie. Over the first few days, I kept finding myself busy, from visiting the local trading post, hanging out at community events. I learned about their daily lives, taking photos and setting up casual interviews with all sorts of people and the locals about these so-called skinwalkers. However, of course, the people of the REZ met my questions about skinwalkers with different reactions. Some would actually cast their eyes downward, offering nothing more than a no comment. Others stared back with a stern look, warning me of the consequences of prying too deep into the things that are best left alone. Yet, a few brave souls did share stories about so-called coyotes who transform into humans. Apparently, they can mimic certain voices and animal sounds, how one should not whistle at night, as it's believed that this might actually invite or summon a skinwalker. So during my time there, I stayed in a hogan that belonged to Sanny's grandma, but at the moment nobody was staying in it, except for Sanny. For those unfamiliar, a hogan is a traditional Navajo dwelling place, constructed from a mixture of logs. There's actually some spiritual significance for the Navajo. It's almost like you can feel a connection to the land, and the door to the hogan always faces east to greet the morning sun, which apparently is important in their daily rituals and traditions. After my string of interviews and questions on the REZ, word seemed to have traveled fast. On the 5th day of my stay, I was outside the hogan trying to capture photos of the beautiful sunset when I noticed an older man approaching. He moved with a slow pace, and his clothing was traditional, and around his neck were hanging all sorts of amulets that were making noise with each step that he took. Zanny, who had been inside the hogan, stepped out and immediately went silent upon seeing this man. He whispered to me, "That's Tahoma, one of the respected medicine men around these parts." Before I could ask more, Tahoma was already within earshot, his piercing eyes set deep and locked with mine. "You're the one asking about those whom walk on all fours," he stated, more than asked. I hesitated for a moment, taken back by his statement. Yeah, I am," I admitted, extending my hand in greeting. "I'm just curious about the legends," and he ignored my hand, cutting me off with a stern, "Curiosity can lead to places from where there's no return." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I was trying to keep the conversation going. "Hey, no disrespect. I'm just here to learn more about the culture and the stories." Tahoma stared deep into my eyes, as if he was studying my words. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke in a grave tone. "There are things on this land that you don't understand, that you cannot comprehend with your questions and your cameras. You awaken things best left undisturbed." I gulped, the weight of his words pressing down on me. "Hey man, I apologize if I offended or overstepped," I said. He leaned in closer, and with a hushed voice filled with urgency, he warned, "Leave this place. They have taken notice of you, and they don't like you watching them." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a silence. My friend, looking as pale as I felt, said, "When Tahoma speaks, we listen. I've been trying to tell you that these things are real, man." That night, the environment of the hogan felt different, more ominous if anything. Every small noise outside made me jump, and the once comfortable walls felt suffocating. I couldn't shake off the medicine man's warning, even though, to be honest, I didn't believe him. Despite the tension that hung in the air that night, a part of me still doubted most of these things. I hadn't personally witnessed any evidence of skinwalkers or the supernatural during my stay so far, and stories and legends were one thing, but tangible proof was another thing. The medicine man's warning, a little scary I will admit, could just be a way to dissuade outsiders like me from prying too deep into Navajo traditions, I thought. I'm not gonna lie, that night, all the Skinwalker talk had me a bit on edge. I guess the fact of being out here kinda didn't help. I had to use the restroom, so I stepped out the hogan and walked towards the dimly lit outhouse. As I was sitting down, remembering that next time to not indulge in other cultural foods so quickly, the distant sounds of the wilderness were interrupted by other noises that I started to hear, which were soft footsteps, the rustle of brush nearby, and the quiet creak of shifting dirt. It felt as if someone or something was slowly circling the outhouse, each footstep sounding closer than the last. Drawing in a silent breath, I waited, heart pounding, straining my eyes to see any trace of movement through the small cracks in the wooden structure, but I didn't see anything. Then, a tap at the door. Keep in mind this was around 11 at night, so I said out loud, "Hey, I'm in here." No response. Then, I heard what sounded like perhaps a dog scampering away on all fours, with the running steps fading into the distance. Well, that was weird, I thought. As I finished up handling my business, I slowly unlatched the door and stepped out, cautiously scanning the darkness. I kid you not, as soon as I took 2-3 steps from behind me, I felt a force clamp down on my shoulder, causing me to jump nearly out of my skin. That's when I turned around, and I saw it. The face of Zanny, with a roaring sound and then a loud laugh. Catching my breath and shaking my head, I said, "Well, alright, you got me, dude," I admitted. He started to laugh, throwing an arm around my shoulders as we began to walk back to the hogan. "You have to admit," he began, sweeping an arm out and pointing to the landscape. "The REZ is beautiful out here at night. Without the bright city lights, everything feels more alive, more connected." I took a moment to appreciate the beauty around us, the clear sky filled with numerous stars. "It's beautiful out here, Sanny, but I do want to let you know, it feels like we're the only ones out here. Some of these stories, legends, they just seem like traditions, to be honest, passed down to make sure that everybody respects the land." He looked at me, then nodded. "Well, that's fair. But some traditions are born from truth that has actually been forgotten," Sanny said as we continue our walk back to the hogan. On my last night at the REZ, I decided to indulge in a bit of mischief and to get back at Sanny for the prank he pulled. While heading back from the outhouse again, I tiptoed around the hogan, tapping gently on its walls and trying to mimic the eerie Skinwalker sounds I heard they made. I was hoping that maybe Sanny would start reciting a prayer that he told me that the people do whenever there's a Skinwalker around. I was waiting to see if Sanny came out when I noticed little bundles near the hogan's base. With curiosity, I took out my phone and captured a few pictures, thinking it would add a unique touch to my video. And nearby, I saw stones, fixed in a way that seemed to be a ritual circle. I moved a few rocks to get a better picture. Then, laughing quietly to myself, and seeing that Sanny was not reacting to this, I began to whistle. And then, in a mocking demonic voice, I called out, "Zanny, it is I who walk on all fours." There was only silence. And after about 5 more minutes, and seeing that he still wasn't coming, I decided to take some last final shots of the beautiful landscape, as I knew this was my last night there. When I finally returned inside, Zanny was there, snoring away. I chuckled to myself, thinking, well, if a real Skinwalker ever shows up, you'll be of no help with that deep sleep. The next morning I said bye to Zanny and his grandma and thanked them for their hospitality. I also told Zanny I would contact him once I put a video together, and that before publishing, I would send it to him to make sure he was okay with it. When I returned home to edit some of the videos and pictures, I noticed that something was off. In the background of many interviews were shadows flickering in and out of the frame. Even when I was trying to edit some of the interviews I had done, the audio itself sounded distorted, with what sounded like whispering echoes behind the words of those whom I interviewed. However, it was the pictures that really disturbed me. Every single image that I had taken, even in the daylight, had a faint shadow figure growing more and more clear with each picture. And the most scary picture was the last few that I took after rearranging those stones. The picture was supposed to be of the landscape, but instead there was a blurry silhouette of what looked to be a person. It had elongated limbs and also a twisted, unnatural posture. Nervously, I contacted Zanny, and after explaining everything, he went quiet, saying that he would ask the local medicine man for advice. The next day Zanny called. His voice sounded worried. He told me I might have caught the attention of something, and that he's communicating with Tahoma, the medicine man, to perform a ceremony. They believe it might help cleanse whatever I had caught the attention of. That same night, as I was asleep in my room, I was awoken by what sounded like whistling outside my window. I woke up half asleep, and I swear, I heard a voice coming from my closet, saying, "I'm in here," mimicking my response that I gave when I was in the bathroom that night in the REZ. I'm posting this here because, out of all the places on the internet, I figure this community might be the most understanding. If anyone knows what I can do to make things right, or how to protect myself, please let me know. I will provide an update tomorrow once Annie tells me how the ceremony went. But please, take this serious. I'm starting to panic as I'm typing this. And I swear, every time I glance at the dim reflection on my PC, when I change a window or tab, that distorted, twisted figure from that last photo I took seems to be standing right behind me.